Alright, this week's portion is Shoftim, which means judges. It covers Deuteronomy 16:18 all the way to 21:9. But before we do anything, we're going to do the blessing for the Torah portion. Roca Eterna Roca Eterna Barak Le'elam Bayed, Roca Eterna Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chafanu mikvahani v'netzalanu torto, Roca Eterna V'notei Torah. Alright, so this portion I actually taught it. Yes?
What's your name again?
Oh, it's Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to meet you.
I forgot to. So I taught this portion last year, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about until I got this book from Rico, and it helped a lot. But last year, we talked about the different courts that they have in Israel, and it was pretty interesting because they kind of have the same system that we have here in the United States. Like we have a Supreme Court, there's only one Supreme Court, and that's going to be in Washington, D.C., and they deal with a bunch of national issues. And then we have our district courts here in the state. There's a bunch of them. They're huge. I've been to one because I had to pay a ticket. It's a long story. I was speeding. So I had to pay that ticket, and I had to go to the district court. But then there's the local courts. And Israel functions in the very same way. They have Grace and Hadrian. Everybody hears about that one. That one's going to be in Jerusalem, not inside the temple. Or yes, kind of the temple. It's in a special building located in the temple. I'm going to do that one. It's going to have 71 judges. If I'm not mistaken, it's 23 Israelites, 23 Levites, and 23 Kohanim. I'm looking at the teachers to say yes. And then on top of that, there's the high priest, and then there's like his VP, his vice president. I forget what his name. What was it? Sagan? Okay, that's like the vice president, high priest. And then they were going to deal with national issues. So like if a tribe started like worshiping an idol, that's their job to deal with that. Or if they're going to appoint a king, that's going to also be their job. So they deal with a lot of big picture stuff. Then after that is the lesser Sanhedrin. They're going to be in communities with more than 120 people. They're going to be in those type of communities. They deal with homicide. So if somebody was murdered or killed or anything like that, they're going to handle that case. Anything where somebody has to pay somebody for an injury or for stealing, they're also going to deal with those cases. And that's going to be their job. And then after that, it's the Beit Din, which is just a group of 3 people, and they just deal with like monetary issues, like they have to pay somebody back for something or whatever. But they don't make any verdicts. So if there's like a crime, like somebody got killed, they're going to shoot it up the ladder, and if it's bigger than them, it also goes up to the Grace and Hadrian. Just like we have here in the courts, if there's something that goes above our local courts, it can go all the way to the Supreme Court. So we kind of have the same system. It's very organized. And then also in this portion, it talks about the cities of refuge. It only talks about 3 of them in this portion, but later on when they conquer the Promised Land, they add 3 more on the other side of the River Jordan. So the River Jordan is going to be like right there in the middle, and you're going to have 3 on that side, and then 3 on the other side. And the way those cities worked was if you committed manslaughter, I think the story that it tells you is like, you're cutting with an axe, and then when you go like this, the head flies off, and it hits the guy in the head. Nobody's going to really believe you that you did it by accident. It's just your word. So this guy would have to flee for his life because his family wants to get revenge, and they have the right to do so. If he did kill somebody, they have the right to avenge that person. So he would go to one of these cities, whatever he was closest to, and he would stay there. If he was innocent, he's going to stay there until the high priest dies. That could be either a very long time or a very short time, depending on how old he is. So like if he just became high priest, he's going to be there for like years. And then if he's found guilty, they're going to take him outside the city and just give him to the family member. So that's how it would work. But what I wanted to talk about this portion is...
When you just stay there, if the high priest was, like you said, young...
That's what I'm saying.
Would he just stay there and not go back?
He would stay there until he dies. So he'd probably be there maybe 30, 40 years. Which is kind of crazy. You in the back.
No, I'll let you continue before I ask.
Say it.
Alright, well, since you forced me. If they left the city. If they were careless and the family that were seeking vengeance killed them, they were fine.
Yeah, it was fine because he left.
Yeah.
He was not supposed to.
It was his fault.
But these 6 cities are actually 6 of 48 Levitical cities. But I wanted to talk about how were those cities established? How did they determine that? Now, did the Levites, do they have any land? Do they have their own land? No, right? They have no inheritance. Who's their inheritance? Yes, God. So that's going to be their inheritance. So what they do when they get to the promised land, they divide the Levites into cities between the tribes. We're going to talk about how they did that. So within the Levites, there's actually multiple families. So you have, first off, the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim. They have their own duties, and then you have the regular Kohathites. That's going to be Moses, Korah. Those are the other Kohathites that don't have the duty of the priesthood. Then you have the Merari and Gershon. Now the Kohanim, they're the only ones that are allowed to deal with the offerings. They can pick up the offerings and handle them, offer up the blood. They're the only ones that can do that. Now the regular Kohathites, their job is to carry the holy items. Now Aaron and his sons, they have to cover it with a sheep, but they're the only ones that can carry it. Nobody else can carry the Ark of the Covenant, just the regular Kohathites. And then you have the Merari. The Merari, what they would do, they would take the frames of the tabernacle. So that's going to be the tent poles, that's going to be the framework of the walls, any of the bolts, all those stuff, that's what they're supposed to take. And then you have Gershonites. The Gershonites have to carry the curtains. That's the covering of the tabernacle, the curtains that are inside the tabernacle. The coverings for the wall were also made of curtains, so they're going to have to handle taking it down and carrying it. And these are going to be like the four main families within the Levites. So you just have to remember that they're all Levites, but they all have different roles. So the Kohanim, they're Levites, but not everybody is a Kohanim. Yeah. So what they do once they get to the promised land, they're going to actually set up 2 boxes. So there's one box for the 12 tribes of Israel and one for the Levites. And they're going to divide the 12 tribes into groups of 4. And then they're going to get the 4 families, and they're going to put the names in each individual box. And then they're going to pull out one name from this box and one name from the other box. So if they pick up the Kohanim and they pick up the tribes, that's the tribes that the Kohanim are going to live in. And so, you had a question?
How often do they do that?
Just once.
Oh,
Now, why did they do lots? Do you guys remember?
to see who would like
To see who did like specific tasks.
What was the purpose of doing a lot? Why don't they just select you? Why do you have to do it as a lot?
It's not right.
Because someone once,
What?
because someone once like entered himself like.
Well, why did they do lots in the temple? Do you guys remember?
Because everybody wants to do it. We talk about the
I know.
Yeah, to be honest, remember they do lots for like the roles. Why would they do lots? Why did they just pick people? What's the purpose of it? Because what is a lot? Is it selective or is it random?
Right.
So it's random, so it's fair.
It's God's will.
Yeah, it's God's will. It's up to probability. You know, for math people, it's going to be probability, but for the Israelites, that's God's will. It's fate. He selected you. That way, it's fair. So nobody can be like, oh, well, you know, the Kohanim, they got this tribe because everybody loves them, and that's what they got the tribe. No, it was a fair process. It's up to God's fate that they got those tribes. So this is how it's going to be done. It's going to be set up with.
I still have a question.
What's your question?
When do they do this?
Like I said, once they get to the promised land in the book of Joshua, if you want to be very specific.
Yes.
But yeah, so once they get to, I think it's Joshua 21.
Okay.
The Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, they're going to get Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The regular Kohathites, they're going to get Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. Merari, they're going to get Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. And then the Gershonites are going to get Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and half of Manasseh. And then the sons of Aaron are going to have 13 cities in those tribes. The regular Kohathites have 10 cities. Merari is going to have 12 cities. And the Gershonites are going to have 13 cities. So altogether, that's the 48 cities total. And that's how they split them up by lot. So that way it was fair. But what's interesting though, it's not just the 48 cities, it's how they divide Israel up. Wait, is this you guys see this? I don't want to rush you guys.
No, it's on me. It's all on here.
It's on your head. You have to brand. Mr. Straight A. So the 48 cities are going to be divided actually into districts. Well, Israel is going to be divided into districts. So there's going to be 2 districts per tribe. So 2 times 12 is going to be 24 districts. And that's how Israel is divided, and that's how they're represented later on. We'll talk about that. So just some important stuff for you guys to remember. There's 4 Levitical families. They're divided into the 12 tribes, into 48 Levitical cities. And then Israel is divided into 24 districts, 2 per tribe. Those are the two things that you should remember. And now, when it comes to Aaron, he also has multiple families underneath him, under his umbrella. He had Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Itamar, but it didn't really work out for those two guys. You remember why? So he's left with Eleazar and Itamar. And Eleazar, he gets the high priesthood. So everybody from Eleazar are going to be in the line of the high priest. Itamar, he's still son of Aaron, but he doesn't have that right as the high priest. So many years later, they're going to have a bazillion descendants. And that's an issue because remember we just talked about the lots for the daily offering. How do you split up lots for a bunch of people like that? How do you make it so everybody gets a chance to be part of the offering? Yeah, everybody does it in pairs. So what they used to do in the time of Moses, they actually divided it into 4 sons of Eleazar, 4 sons of Itamar, and that would be 8 guards total. And a guard is basically just a person that would handle the offering for that day. That makes keep it simple. And then in the time of Samuel, then they bumped it up to 8 and 8, 16 total. And then when you get to David, David is going to do 12, 12, 24 total. And then they decide to do something called the Mishmarot. And the Mishmarot is basically just a division or order. So they divide all the families into specific orders, and that's how everybody got a chance to do the offerings every week. So for example, you're going to have the order here, and let's say order 1. Order 1 is going to serve Nisan the first week, and then 6 months later, they're going to serve the first week of Tishri. And then order 2 is going to serve Nisan on the second week. 6 months later, they do Tishri on the second week, and so on and so forth. And that's how they divided all the orders. So for the Kohanim, there's going to be 16 clan leaders from Eleazar and 8 clans from Itamar. There was more sons from Eleazar. They didn't really explain why or whatever, but that's just what happened. And then lots, again, are going to be drawn to determine which clan gets which order. And again, lots are done so that way it's fair and nobody says, this guy got the first order because he's the favorite. Everything was fair. But they're also going to divide the Levites too. Because the Levites, they have their own families. Their families are going to be split into 24 clans. And all those clans come from these 3 guys, Asaph, Ammon, and Jeduthun. So they're going to get the sons from those guys, and they're going to make the 24 groups. And then lots, again, are going to be drawn to determine which order they're going to serve in. So eventually, they do something like this. So you have the first order, you're going to have the Kohanim from that family. The E just means Eleazar, the I is Itamar. And then you're going to have a Levim from that family, and they always are going to serve during that time period. Always. This is from now and forever, that's the way it's supposed to be. And so just to reiterate what I was talking about, the Kohanim and the Levites are divided into 24 orders, and then each order has one family of the Kohanim and one family from the Levite, and they're going to serve that whole week. And they always serve together, they never mix.
How much was in one order?
It was 24, it's supposed to be 24, I think, guards from the Kohanim. And the Levites, that one, I don't think I read that. But the reason why this is important is because if you go to the 8th order, the Kohanim is Abijah, I think I'm saying that right. And that's important because when you get to Luke 1, John the Baptist's origin story, you read it. Can somebody read that for me? Anybody? Would you Lucas? Back?
Did you call me out like that?
You raised your hand. Go ahead.
I'll scratch my head. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. Raquel? Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. I knew it. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside.
So he comes from the division of Abijah. And if we go back to that chart that I did, we know that it's from this order, but we also know that it's done at a specific time. There's going to be 2 times when he's going to be serving. And why is that important? Because this part of the New Testament tells you when John the Baptist gets conceived. Because right after that happens, he speaks to the angel, he becomes mute because he didn't believe that his wife was going to be conceiving a child. And then it says right afterwards, when he comes back from that week, he conceives a child with Elizabeth. So if we go and use a Hebrew calendar, he could either be serving on Kislev or Sivan. So that means John the Baptist could have been conceived somewhere around that time, possibly. So then if you do the math, because later on in the same chapter, he talks about how 6 months later, Yeshua is conceived with Mary. So you can kind of figure out when was he conceived, and that would be around almost the same month. That's where it gets good. So then, okay, if you do the math, if Yeshua's conceived either on Kislev or Sivan, and you count 9 months, it's going to fall either on Tishri or Adar. Now, Adar is nothing really significant, but Tishri is going to be like around that time is when they have Sukkot. And Sukkot is about what? The regathering, about redemption. So it makes a lot more sense, and a lot of Christian scholars believe that this is when he was born because it goes in line with who he was and things like that. But if you notice, none of that falls even close to December. So now you have like physical proof that you can be like, hey, you can prove that Yeshua was not born on December 25th. You can show people. Pretty interesting. But then let's go back to Luke 1. So if we remember at this part, it says, and when the time for the burning of the incense came, all assembled worshipers were praying outside. So who is he talking about? Who is these assembled worshipers, and what are they praying outside of the temple? So if we go to Numbers 28, 1-2, can somebody read that for me?
Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, and say to them, My offering, my food for my offerings, made by fire as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time.
So from this verse, the Jewish people believe that all of Israel has to come and represent themselves for every offering, for every communal offering. And the issue with that is that we have daily communal offerings. So what do you do when you have a population of millions and millions of people? How are they all going to show up at the same time every single day for the daily offerings? So what they do something called the mamadot, which means standing. And the reason why it's called standing is because there's going to be men that are selected from each district to stand in for everybody else. So now everybody doesn't have to show up. You're just going to send representatives. So if you remember, we have 48 cities. They're divided into districts. And there's 2 districts per tribe, so there's going to be 24 districts. Remember that, there's 24 districts. Another thing that's interesting is the way the tribes are also split up based upon, what would you call it? Not rank. Position of power, I guess. But so like each tribe had like a prince called the Nasi. He was kind of like the governor. And then below him, he had somebody called the Rosh Ma'amad. Am I saying that? And those people were in charge of the other family members below them, the Behai. So these are just all the clans. These are the leaders of those clans, and then they report to him, who's the leader of the tribe. So everything was very organized. That's something that I think is very interesting, because when you just read the Bible, you just read it kind of like as a story. You don't really take into the fact that they were a nation, and not only that, but they were very highly organized. We were talking, I think, with Joseph Good the other day, and he was talking about the technology that they had, to get the water from the cisterns and stuff like that. It was really advanced for their civilization. So again, you have men standing as representatives for Israel, and there's going to be 12 men from each district. And again, there's 2 districts per tribe, 12 tribes total. So there's going to be 288 representatives from Israel. And that's going to be weekly. So you have 288 people coming weekly to represent Israel. And those 288 people are going to be divided by 4 days. So they're going to be split into 72 representatives. And those 72 people are going to be 3 men from each district. And the reason why they get split up is because they're going to do days of fasting. So there's going to be 4 days that they fast, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They don't fast on Friday because they said that would ruin Shabbat, because you're fasting and you're supposed to be delighting in Shabbat. Obviously, you're not supposed to fast on Shabbat because it's the day of delight. You're supposed to enjoy the Lord. And then they don't fast on Sunday because they don't want to, just abruptly end Shabbat and then go into a fast. So they just kind of leave this little gap, and then those are the 4 days where they're supposed to be fasting. Now, what's interesting though is that even though, yes, these guys are sent to represent their tribes, everybody back home still has a responsibility to do their part. So what they would do, they're going to read these readings from Genesis 1 all the way to Genesis 2, the story of creation. And then while they do that, the people that are fasting are going to pray certain prayers during each day. So Monday they pray for the travelers at sea. Tuesday they pray for the travelers on land. Wednesday they pray for the youth. And then on Thursday they pray for the pregnant women. Every single week. Week after week after week after week. Non-stop. Yes?
How often would they change the group of 72?
But there's also going to be 24 orders. So there's going to be the order for the Kohanim, for the Levites, and then for these guys. They're all in the same order. And then the Levites are also going to read these Psalms. These are chapters. So they're going to read chapter 24, 48, 82, 94, 81, 93, and 92. Now, I'm not going to go through each Psalm, but if you guys go on your own free time, you're going to see that these Psalms and Genesis 1 to 2 is like a coronation. This is when God establishes his authority on earth, and all these verses are about the coronation of God. So they're doing this weekly, constantly, non-stop.
It's just the Levite songs, they should be in the Siddur.
Yeah, they're going to be the prayers, yeah. So then if we go back to Luke 1, remember again I talked about how the angel of the Lord appears to him. And it says that he's standing on the right side of the altar of incense, and when Zechariah saw him, he was troubled and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John." So when I used to read this back in the day, I always assumed that when he was doing the incense that he was praying for his barren wife. That's what I thought he was praying. But then you learned that they actually had a prayer that they were supposed to do while doing the incense. And then Raquel was able to find that. What was the book?
The Temple and its Ministries.
The Temple and Its Ministries by...
Alfred Epstein.
I don't know if it's the name. The title I can't. So, can somebody read the prayer for me? It's not the whole prayer, but just the interesting parts.
Why don't you want us to see it?
Just raise your hand.
True it is that you are Adonai our God, the God of our fathers, our King and the King of our fathers, our Savior and the Savior of our fathers, our Maker and the Rock of our salvation, our help and our deliverer. Your name is from everlasting, there is no God beside you. A new song did they that words delivered singing to your name by the Sephardim. New song did they that.
I don't know what version this was. It also used thy a lot.
Yeah.
So I changed it. So this is what they're going to be praying, not only Zechariah, but all the other representatives that are outside of the court. They're also going to be repeating this prayer. So if you could continue, please.
Yeah. Preserve us and keep us. Gather the scattered ones into your holy courts. This is part of the verse. To keep your statutes and to do your good pleasure and to serve your with our whole heart. As this day we confess unto you, and may it please you to bless your people Israel at all times and at every hour with your peace.
We said the bottom one today.
Yeah.
And then the top one comes after the Shema every day.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But you see, so that's the prayer that he's going to be doing. And this is my opinion. I'm assuming as soon as this is finished, that's when the angel shows up and says your prayer has been answered. So it's not talking about his wife having a kid. It's talking about Israel asking for God's peace to be on them. Which, you want to say something?
No, see.
Oh, you were like, but yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So that's why I think it's interesting to learn more about the temple, because it opens a lot of other avenues to learn from the Bible. Joseph Good was here like a couple weeks ago. How many weeks ago was it?
3 weeks.
3 weeks ago already? No way. But he was here and he was showing a lot how the language in the New Testament borrows from the prayers that they use in the Siddur and stuff like that. So you can't just read the Bible as a book. You have to go out and also study the context. You gotta study the temple. A lot of the temple is everywhere, like literally almost in every. I think it's every book. Every book mentions the temple, even Revelations. I was talking about it with the teachers this morning because I noticed that Revelations always talks about the 24 elders.
Ooh, yeah.
So I don't know if that's a connection with the 24 districts. I have to ask. But I think that makes more sense if that's that than what they say in Christianity. They say it's the church, which I guess if you want to look at it that way, but I don't really use it. But yeah, so I think it's important that you guys, if you want to learn more about the Bible, still look into this stuff. Joseph Good, usually when you ask him like where to start, he's going to give you the Mishnah, which is the rulings of the Sanhedrin at the time. So they give you a lot of background information. And also the Siddur, because it has a lot of prayers, and those prayers are going to be relevant to a lot of the eschatology and a lot of the sayings that they use in the New Testament. So if you start from there and then work your way up, you don't have to like learn everything about the temple overnight because there's a lot of information. And I don't expect you guys to remember everything about this. What I want you guys to remember is how organized everything is in Israel. But not only that, but like how everything is centered around God every single week, every single day. And then think about your life. There's a lot of people that complain. They're like, oh, things are not really working out in my life, but like, are you really putting God like number one on your list? Daily. Do you get up and rise up like it says and have Him on your mind, or are you just going through the motions? And sometimes it happens to us too. Like we have school, we have work, and we get caught up in that, and we kind of forget sometimes. But we see here that it was a constant thing that they had to remember. And what happens if they don't remember? We see what happens. They start falling into idolatry. They start falling back. Generations start going backwards, and then everything becomes a mess because they were not being consistent. And I think that's the key to keeping everything together is being consistent. That's pretty much it. I didn't want to go too complicated today because again, I taught this last year, and I didn't want to reiterate the stuff that I did. So that should do it pretty much. Yes.